No one is more surprised than me to see me standing up here this week. When Pastor Molly mentioned to Conrad and I the possible opportunity to do a talk about one of the 5 senses and how it relates to a gospel story on some Sunday in March, I thought, cool. No. If I did a talk about one of the senses, I figured I could probably do taste. I love to cook. I love to feed people. But nah, probably not. I didn't give it another thought. But that night, when I went to bed, I couldn't seem to think about anything else. It kind of went like this. You know, you can talk about sight. You like that woman at the well story. No. If I did it, I'd want to do taste, but nah, I don't want to. Your star word was observe. That's sight. Nah. I'd maybe do it if I could just write it down and people could read it. I don't want to stand up in front of everybody and talk. Maybe if everyone turned their chairs around. But I guess that would defeat the whole purpose of talking about sight. Well, if you did sight, here's a bunch of things you could say. And there was this rapid succession of ideas and several hours of sleeplessness. By around 1 o'clock in the morning, I finally figured I really was maybe supposed to try to do this. So I got up and emailed Pastor Molly and let her know. Once I'd done that and made some notes on all those ideas, I could finally fall asleep. And so here I am, talking about the sense of sight and the woman at the well. Deep breath. When I think of sight, the sense of sight, I can't help but think of my grandma George. George was my maiden name, not her first name. Grandma George was my dad's mom, a short, pear-shaped lady who always wore house dresses and aprons and a bun on the top of her head. Even with the bun, she was still under 5 feet tall. I seem to have inherited her body type, but being a good foot taller than her, I never had to resort to the bun. She had a rather stern expression most of the time and didn't smile very easily, but she loved to talk, and she loved to tell stories. Grandma didn't hear very well, so she wore 2 hearing aids, and in those days, they seemed to buzz more often than they amplified anything. She didn't see very well either. She had glaucoma, and I think some other vision issue, and she wore Coke bottle glasses. For those of you not old enough to remember when Coke always came in glass bottles, that means her lenses were very thick, and they magnified the size of her eyes when you looked at her. I remember sometimes when I watched her cook, she'd lay down a utensil and you would see her feel for it on the counter to find it back and keep on working. With these 2 senses affected, when you went to visit Grandma George, you always had to get up close to talk to her. She would often touch your hand or your arm when she talked. Conrad and I moved to the same town as my mom and my grandma, the town I grew up in, for a few years after we got married. When the boys were young, Jake, our oldest, was about 3, and Nick was still a baby. We went with my mom to visit Grandma George. I remember her touching each boy and saying their names, and then she said, "Isn't this something that the big one looks just like his mom, and the little one looks just like his dad?" Now my first thought probably should have been something like, "Oh, isn't that sweet?" But in reality, my thought was, "Come on, Grandma, you can't even see." But as the boys grew, it became clear that Grandma George had really seen her great-grandchildren. Jake did look a lot more like me, and Nick certainly grew up to look a lot more like Conrad. With her diminished sense of sight, Grandma had seen more than we did. In today's gospel about the woman at the well, Jesus really sees that Samaritan woman. He doesn't just see her appearance or what she's doing, but he sees her past, her failures, maybe things she was hurt by or embarrassed of, things she probably would have liked to keep hidden. I remember once hearing a sermon on this text that explained that this Samaritan woman actually was trying to hide by going to the well in the middle of the day. It was typical for women in that time to go to the well for water in the early morning or the evening to avoid the desert heat. The Samaritan woman chose to get her water during the hottest part of the day to avoid being seen by others who were probably judging her on that past that Jesus had seen. So she hid from her community by going to the well alone. There is some comfort in hiding. I can relate to that. One of my requirements for doing this talk was that I could stand in the pulpit and hide a little bit. The idea of standing out there in front of God and everybody freaked me out. It's way out of my comfort zone. Even though I sing in church frequently, I like it best and I feel most confident when I can blend in with everybody up there in our choir robes, or stand slightly behind the banner that hangs there when we sing praise and celebration. There's some comfort in hiding. But the Samaritan woman couldn't hide from Jesus. In my imagination, this woman who wasn't even thrilled to be seen is probably even less thrilled to have Jesus talk to her. Her plan was to get the water and get home, and now she's having this uncomfortable conversation with a Jewish man. Jesus first showed that he did see who she was as a whole person, and then showed her that he wasn't judging her for it. He showed her that he accepted her by taking her water and by talking to her. He even offers her a gift, water that would quench her thirst forever. And then he reveals himself to her as the Messiah. He reveals himself to this woman who's been hiding and who probably felt pretty sure she was unimportant and unacceptable. This woman who would have been content to be unseen. To me, though, the most amazing part of the story is what the woman does after her encounter with Jesus. She has experienced this surprising love and acceptance, and now this woman who was intent on hiding goes back to the community that judged her and shamed her and starts telling them about her encounter with Jesus. She must be stepping way out of her comfort zone. This woman who didn't want to be seen is putting herself out there. After she was seen and had experienced the joy of acceptance, she wants to share it. She's willing to be vulnerable enough to risk judgment and share her story. And now the community who didn't accept her, but who judged her, is willing to follow her to see Jesus. She found joy in being seen by Jesus. This joy in being seen reminds me of the last time I played hide and seek with my 4- and 5-year-old grandsons. I counted, they hid. As soon as I said, "Ready or not, here I come," I heard a loud, excited giggle coming from under a blanket on the floor. When I pulled it off his head, the 5-year-old Lee looked up at me all smiles and hugged my legs. He was overjoyed to be seen. I said, "I wonder where Jonas is." And the top of a blonde head appeared from behind a chair in the corner. A little voice said, "Look behind the chair, Grandma." When I did and made eye contact with him, Jonas, the 4-year-old, exploded with laughter and jumped out to get a hug. The joy of being seen. Jesus sees us too, just as he did the Samaritan woman. He sees us as we are, with all the things about ourselves that we'd rather hide, all the things we'd like to change. He sees the things we judge ourselves for, the things that hurt us. He sees when we feel we've fallen short or feel we're not good enough, and he still accepts us and loves us. He reminds us that we are enough just the way we are, that we are loved, that we are his. We can experience joy in being seen and accepted by Jesus too. His example encourages us to see each other in a deeper way, to become vulnerable enough to accept each other as we are, even if we don't agree sometimes, to share with each other and support each other in good times and bad without judgment, to accept each other, to be vulnerable enough to step out of our comfort zones and hide a little less. So here's what happened at the first service. The last page of my sermon was stuck in my folder back at my chair. So I had to leave this comfortable pulpit to go get it. And I kind of took it as a sign that maybe I'm supposed to do that. get out of my comfort zone a little bit, so I'm going to the scary place to read the end. There was a petition in the prayers of the people 2 weeks ago that summed this all up for me. Dear God, lead us in showing grace and hospitality to all who struggle with doubt or shame. Make your church holy ground where all people can be seen and loved for who you have created them to be.